Welcome to Speak as One. I'm Julie Coriath. I want to thank our first sponsor, Spring Frost. They have been so wonderful and have let me use their clothing for these stories, and I couldn't be more grateful. If you want to check them out, you can go to their clothing boutique in North Austin, or you can go online and we'll have all the information below. But right now, I am so excited to introduce Adam McNichol, who is the founder of Well Good. Hi, Adam.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
When did you get into Austin, Texas?
I've been here for a week now.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
So you've been doing South by. How is it for you?
It's been fantastic. It's been exhausting. It's been mind expanding, all of those things. But it's my third time doing South by Southwest, and it's one of the best events to come to around the world.
Yeah.
In terms of just learning, in terms of meeting people, business to a certain degree as well, but really it's just about the kind of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Well Good, can you explain more about your company?
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you how I got here in the first place.
Okay.
So it's actually related to South by Southwest. So when I was going to come the last time I came was in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point I was running a digital agency. So I was running the company. It was based out in Stockholm, in Sweden, and also we had offices in Amsterdam and New York. I was doing a lot of traveling from the UK where I live. And I got to the point where I completely burnt out, like exhausted. And I didn't realize this, but I'd been in that state for a number of years. So from working in London for many years in advertising and in digital and tech, and I'd been at a state where I'd also had kids, moving house, all that kind of thing, and climbing up the ladder and all that kind of thing, and seniority and running businesses. And I got into a state where I was so in the moment of my mental health issue that I didn't realize I was there. I had no perspective on myself. And it wasn't until I actually came here on business in 2019 that it got to the point where I was my rock bottom with that. I was an absolute mess.
Can you explain what your rock bottom looked like?
So for me, uncontrolled emotions, uncontrolled intrusive thoughts, a really high degree of anxiety and worry. The thing that I've discovered that I have is generalized anxiety disorder. So my issue is that I worry about things to a degree, but I find it very difficult to focus on one thing. So it's almost like if you've got a TV on and you're just flicking the channels really, really quickly all the time. And that's how my brain kind of operates when I'm in these states of high stress and high anxiety. And what that means, what it manifests as is physically is a lot of stomach problems, and you have bad skin, and you have a quite high adrenal response. So you're in the kind of fight or flight mode. And I was teetering towards that point where I was in a permanent fight or flight mode. And this is a big problem we're seeing in burnout, especially in Europe. And we're seeing it in a lot of kind of like high achieving, fast moving cultures as well, where people are getting to this state and they're not coming down from this point of anxiety, because a fight or flight response is designed for a specific evolutionary purpose. Mm-hmm. It's to kind of remove yourself from danger or to engage in it and solve the problem. But when you're in a career and life, and you can't stop that, and when the stressor is not obvious, it's very difficult to stop. Mm-hmm. And what it took for me was the realization that I was at that point, but the only way I could do that is my wife pointing it out to me. Mm. That was the thing. I couldn't see it myself. I thought I'd normalized it, I'd internalized it. Mm. So that was it.
Wow, that's powerful.
I saw this also in the people I employed as well, and the team members, and yet it was very difficult to do anything about that because we're in this state of that we have to do this work for our clients, we have to be there, we have to fly to that place, or we have to deliver this thing, or have to design this thing, or whatever it is. And many of the team were feeling the same way. I got to the point where I couldn't exist like that anymore, so I stopped working completely. And took time off to be able to recover. And it is a recovery, but that journey is never a recovery. You go into a hospital and you have your arm kind of reset and put a plaster cast and you're fine. it's not like that. You have to kind of really work at that, and it takes time, and you have to. I did cognitive behavioral therapy to try and kind of get a lot of those thoughts out in a guided, structured way, to try to understand why I was feeling like that. But the stimulus for me was work. So that's the core of it. But I have to work.
Right.
So it's a bit of a tricky situation. So I've reconfigured my life around the idea of having a portfolio of things that I do. And a mixture of things which are philanthropic, which are volunteer, things which pay money, things which interest me much more, but things that mean that I'm not chasing the money or chasing status or anything like that. Those things will happen naturally. And in myself, I'm much more conscious that I don't need to be that person that I was when I lived in London and I was, having a job where I was flying around and all that. I can be much more in the moment, and it means that with my family in particularly, I can be the best dad and the best husband I can be, because I was not great. We went on holiday to Paris and we went with friends, and I was not a nice person at all. I was not sleeping, I was very easy to anger, I was irritable, all of those things, but I didn't realise at all. I thought that was just me at the time. Later on, those friends that I went on the holiday with, I apologised to, and they said, we realised that. And also, the person that I went with, he got into the same state that I did, and I gave him the same advice about trying to move on from that job, and he's just done that as well.
Oh, nice.
So I've passed that on, which is a great thing.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like you've set up your career now where you have more control over it.
Absolutely.
So if you need to take a day because you're having high stress or whatever, you can do that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's gonna, in my humble opinion, it actually then produces better work because you're not working while you're in the grind of it, no sleep. It's like take a break for the day, then get back on things or whatever.
It's a huge paradigm shift for people who work. For people who are kind of mid-career or kind of really trying to push themselves as well, realizing that you can live with a different dynamic in your life and you don't have to be just 24 hours pushing it. I've worked at advertising agencies and people burn out incredibly young there. If you look at the finance industry, people burn out really young there, but it's a high risk, high reward situation. The amount of suicide and mental illness and severe mental illness in financial services is enormous. Index is like a third higher than most industries, simply because these people are working in these environments. What happened when I wanted to continue work and change, I always wanted to do a startup and have that challenge. So I looked at mental health and looked at kind of what was happening out there at the time, and what it struck me was a lot of people, when they're talking about mental health in businesses, they're not really asking the team what they think or what they want. They tend to be delivering services to them, so they'll buy a service like Calm or Headspace or something like this and go, here you go, have this, and the company, in fact, it's the same as greenwashing, but it's done with mental health. The companies are not really thinking deeply about how they affect their staff, so how a policy decision, how a maternity policy decision would affect the female employee, how the fact that the way that they do the recruitment process may be biased against certain people, and how they might not be inclusive towards certain people with the social things that they do. And they're not thinking deeply about these things, but people are, staff are. So the idea for Wellgood came about from being able to start to measure companies and play that back to them about how well they're doing around that, but not asking the companies, asking the employees what they really think. The key thing being is that if you see one company and they are ethical, they are good for mental health, they have mental first aid in place, they have great policies in place, they empower different diversities within the organisation, when they do all of those things, you're more likely to attract great people and retain great people. So that's what Wellgood is going to be about. It's about the idea of being able to be a TripAdvisor, but for people who are looking for a job, but reviewed by the people who work there. Because you don't know. There's no way of knowing. There's things like Glassdoor, but that has a very small slice of information, of data, like how do you rate the CEO or what's the salary? And a lot of people who are millennials or zillennials, they don't care so much about those things. there's the great resignation happening. It's not because of salaries. It's because people don't want to work in organisations where they're not valued or they don't see themselves reflected in the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where Wellgood is kind of coming from, and it's coming from a kind of way of supporting mental health on its most holistic basis, as opposed to kind of thinking about specific disorders or any things that you can, as I said, mental health first aid or any of these kind of disciplines. It's thinking, how can you create a business that is actually much more inclusive across a huge range of measures for individuals.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let me see if I'm getting this right. So then you're working so people can sign up at Wellgood, and then you help find them the job that works well with them.
No, the original version of the business was we went into companies and we surveyed staff using an AI bot. So using kind of WhatsApp and chat, and we asked a series of questions, and awareness of the company's policies, of their ethics, of the boss, and their place in there, if they experience discrimination, any workplace issues, things like that. But what we quickly realised is that asking people a battery of questions is just too much, and it just doesn't really work for people.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're flipping that on its head. And rather than going into businesses, we're asking the public what they think. So, say a company who, there's a Google business down there, our office down this road, and we could go and survey their staff, but online, and publish that to the public about what their staff think of them. It's totally anonymous. So that's the concept that we're building at the moment. So right now, what we've done is we've flipped that on, the original concept on its head. And we're going out straight to the public. So we're not trying to monetize it straight away. We're going out to people and asking what they think. And then what we're doing is building up that profile about a business, and then we will make that open. And that's going to be quite contentious for some businesses because they don't want to know how they're doing with these things.
No, and what's baffling to me is that they don't understand that this could help their business.
Yeah.
I mean, really, if you think about if they're feeling like they're supported at work, they're going to go home and feel supported with their family.
Yeah.
They're going to take that to their family, and then because when you don't feel supported at work, you go home, you're irritated, like what you're saying, you don't sleep, you don't do all these things, and then it's just the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
But when you can learn to take care of yourself, or if you have a company that's very mindful of that, then it creates a different type of everything around you changes.
Yeah.
When you can help one person to a company, what have you.
It completely is demonstrable on the bottom line of a business. Businesses who are better at looking after their teams, and not in this kind of way that has happened in Silicon Valley, which is much more around, we will give you free meals, or we will do your laundry, or whatever it is. That's not just looking after staff, it's much more deeper and holistic than that. I don't mean holistic in the terms of chakras being aligned or anything like that. It's very much in terms of thinking entirely around the problem. So if you look at some companies who do get this a lot better, people like Netflix are actually really good. So when you join Netflix, you spend a really long period of time onboarding in the business, like 6 months, deeply understanding how they operate, what they do, have different teams, and they have committees of staff, not management, of people who come together to talk about these things and influence the business in terms of how they treat other members of staff. So they democratize that within the organization, so it's much more embedded as opposed to top-down, which means that you've got much higher retention, much higher efficiency, and at the moment with the Great Resignation happening, this is one of the most important things. You've got to be able to build loyalty in your teams, and you can't do that in a cynical way. There's incentivization, like giving people more money and all that kind of stuff, but that is valued less now by many people. Yeah. Especially in Europe, they want things that are much more deeper to the soul, as it were.
Yeah.
And younger people as well, graduates, people who are on their first or second job, they're looking for a very different thing. And we've gone from the state of people having employment for 5, 10, 15 years, that's shortened down to people changing every 1-2 years, and then the Great Resignations happen now, and that companies need to realise that the better they treat their staff, the better the company will be, the longer they'll retain staff, the better quality the work will be, the more money they will make at the end of the day, and the happier everybody will be.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do. But I work across a range of different kind of areas of mental health. My business partner is bipolar, and trying to accommodate that within our business and how we operate. And we're very kind of open about these things and open about the struggles that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a huge destigmatization that's happened over the last few years around mental health and the conversation around that. But it's still quite difficult for a lot of people to kind of come out and go, hey, I'm not always 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's variable.
Mm-hmm.
It can change.
No, I love that you're doing this. And I was just talking to Babita Spinelli. She's a relationship specialist and therapist, but she also speaks all over the world and works with Fortune 500 companies. And at one time she was a lawyer, and later in life switched to become a therapist. And one thing that she was talking about is when we can have the CEOs and the executives become more vulnerable, it creates a completely different atmosphere to have our leaders, because then everybody that works with them, understands that they're alike in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And for example, we had Art Acevedo on here, and he was the police chief of Austin, and then Houston, and then Miami. And oh my goodness, he afterwards, I was talking about this with Jay, who works with me here. We wanted to follow him. Like, what an incredible leader. And the reason why is because he showed us his vulnerable side.
Yeah.
And the reason he cared so much about mental health and the police force and how he changed that.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, it also can start at the top and then help.
I think so. There's it needs to come both ways. I sit on the board of different organisations, and I'm very open about the fact that I have mental health issues. I mean, I'm recovering. We're always recovering, but we always can have lapses. Before I came to South by, I had a moment because I was remembering what I was like the last time I was here, so that was triggering me again. So I was just trying to gauge that and trying to deal with that before I came here. When I got here, I'm fine, but the kind of anticipation was a trigger for me. So I sit and I talk to people about these things. I was in a board meeting the other week where I was talking about the fact that I have mental health problems and these things are happening, and it's important that we do that at a leadership level, that we can start to build policies around that as well, and start to also build. So we have one of the businesses that I work in, I've mentioned it, mental health first aid, which I don't know if you have it in the US, but it's the same concept as normal first aid, as you would see, if someone kind of cuts themselves, breaks an arm. It's about trying to help someone in that immediate moment to try to kind of signpost them to the help that they need. So what we're doing is we're training all of the leaders in the business, both kind of the C-suite, the kind of top of the business, but also the kind of the management layer as well, and also keep going deeper to do the mental health first aid training, so people are aware of that. And already that's paid results, because we've had a member of staff who came to us and we spotted something and we stopped a problem really quickly, and we had that difficult conversation about suicide. Now, I've had a member of my team commit suicide, and we didn't see it coming at all, because we were completely unaware.
I know. So
if we can just do that once and manage to help someone, it's just it pays. It's incredibly worth the effort to do it. But it's always incredibly important that people in leadership positions like Sky you were talking about talk about it openly, destigmatize it as much as possible.
Yes, destigmatize it. It's that I've just started up with. I've been working on it for a couple of years, but really a year ago I started, and I'm just now forming like a team, and I'm so mindful of that, because when I got my divorce and I tried to start finding jobs, I had my breakdowns, and the moment I was fired.
Right.
Because I was very emotional, very fragile, and I have my own, I've struggled with mental health my whole life.
Yeah.
And luckily, this divorce actually opened up all of that and made me deal with it.
Yeah.
But it was so hard. I mean, the moment I started crying, it just seems like, the lead CEO of the company or whatever was just didn't want anything to do with it.
I think this is one of the problems with more macho kind of sense of business as well. We have less of that, I think, in Europe, and yes, less of that in the tech and creative industries. But it's so disappointing to hear when men act in those ways, because I don't think you get that from a woman. I think you get much more empathy and understanding.
I did. One was a man, one was a woman.
Yeah.
But she felt like a man. she ran her business that way.
Well, one of the things I think about is, and we've tried to do, is around menopause. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things that people don't tend to talk about. Men don't talk about it at all. It's incredibly important because the physiological changes, the mental changes that happen in women in perimenopausal states and when they're menopausal are huge, and they affect how you behave, and they physically you're incredibly affected. So it's building awareness of those things in businesses as well, which you wouldn't necessarily classify as a mental health thing, but you would do across the spectrum of wellness, so the companies understand that. So when you have an employee who gets to that position, just be conscious of it and be aware of it and have a way of dealing with it. Policies are one thing and you can write them down, all that kind of stuff, but training and awareness and destigmatization is incredibly important around those things, because people at different stages in life can be very different. So someone in their 20s who can't afford to buy a home because of the way that financial systems work now, versus someone who's in their 40s who may have gone through a divorce, or the kids are leaving home, versus someone who's menopausal, or someone who's lost a parent. This stuff happens to everybody.
Right.
It's universal. It isn't. And one of the things that gets me when I come to South by Southwest, sometimes you have these high achieving people on stage, and it seems like, hey, everything's amazing, everything's a dream, but the reality is they're like everybody else, right?
Exactly.
And the more people can talk about those things and address those things and normalize those things, like having the conversation, for instance, in an office, making sure that sanitary products are available for free. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Why wouldn't you do that?
Right? There's so many businesses don't even think that that's something. And for instance, Zoom etiquette, right? So a lot of companies that have, obviously with what's happened with COVID, they've gone to Zoom meetings, and a lot of people have heard these stories, are getting annoyed first thing in the morning with female members of staff who haven't got the camera on, right? Like, why are you not doing it? You need your camera on. And what they're not realizing is that at that point in the day, that person hasn't put their makeup on. They don't want to be seen in that way. They still can do their job. They can still do the thing perfectly well, but they haven't appreciated a different point of view on that situation, and it's stigmatizing.
Right, and they're having to deal with, a state of the world that they've never been in. And so it actually might be a little bit harder for them to wake up right on time to get that done like they would have when they went to a job. And you get tired whenever you're dealing with things that feel heavy, and the pandemic was heavy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying on that. With what I'm doing, a part of it, something I've been thinking about is, could I, and this may be on film or may not, but I would just want to, I'll talk to you about it now anyway, is I thought, one thing about stories is that it helps you relate, it helps you understand, like the more we talk about mental health, that everyone goes through it in some way. It might not be to one extreme or the other, but we do.
Yeah.
And the more we talk about it, the more we can stigmatize it and bring about, hopefully some compassion.
Yeah.
And I thought about, asking just a couple of small companies here around Austin, like, if you or your employees would be interested in sharing a story, because it really helps bring people together, or bring somebody into the company. Like I've done a couple of events around town where we have almost like a VH1 storyteller. So there's a musician and we're talking about their mental health, and then as soon as those events are over, everyone's coming up talking about it.
Yeah.
I've struggled with this, I've done this.
Yeah.
And it builds community.
Yeah.
And that's what's important. You want to be able to go to work and say, not say, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm good.
The conversation has definitely changed the last few years, I've noticed, and people are talking about mental health much more openly. So what you're talking about there is I would encourage that. The thing that I'd say is be careful about safeguarding. So I've been at events where people talk about their mental health and they're a confident person and they can talk about it. A a lot of people can't, and not because of the stigma, it's because of the trauma or something that's happened to them. So if you're thinking about abuse and things like that, or if they have things like PTSD, triggering things can be very bad. So this is one of the things that I'd urge to think about, is that you need, with those situations, to wrap care around those things. I attended an event in London which was about digital founders, entrepreneurs talking about their mental health. And there were some great stories, but there was also no safeguarding at all in that room, and there was quite obviously people in distress. So we had to, my colleague and I had to go and have conversations with people, right? We're not even part of the organisation, right? You could see that. So some people don't want to talk about it and can't talk about it, and need to be signposted to the right place, whether it's therapy, whether it's family, or whether it's just taking them aside and being quiet with them and letting them know that it's fine. And they can just, don't worry, it's okay. So I think with this, it's like, the more we can talk about it and destigmatize it in the open, the better. And that's something I definitely do, and I will, I'll happily tell anybody about kind of how I am, and how I think, and how I can be, and how I can slip into kind of times of hyper arousal and hyper arousal, and kind of the wave of my kind of mental health. But some people will not be able to get there, and those are the people we need to kind of look out for. And so the person that unfortunately committed suicide, or was successful with their suicide, as they say, we had no clue at all, right? And I don't think any amount of us talking about our own mental health would have helped. So there are going to be people who will internalize it to the degree where they will not talk about it in any way, shape or form. And also people who don't realize it as well. Self-realization with mental health is a really big thing. I didn't know I was mentally ill at all. I thought it was normal. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I've had quite a few people come on here who have, most of them have a family member that had taken their life, and two that attempted to and were unsuccessful, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Just trying to understand more about that. You know, it's hard to understand when so many are successful. And, it's something I think about often. How can we help? How can we be supportive? What can we do? But like you said, there are just some people that I think you could probably try to do anything.
Yeah, it's very tricky. There's a great organisation where I live called Andy's Man Club, which is, it's a group of working class guys who are super open about their mental health and their problems. And not usually a group of people who would be typically open about that. But they've created an environment where they say it's okay to talk. That's their strap line.
That's amazing.
And they run these kind of meetups, I'd say. And it's kind of, the format I think is kind of almost like, they sit in a circle, they talk, they might have a beer, but they talk about their emotions, all that kind of stuff. But it's the forum designed to do that, but it's designed in such a way that it actually is quite appealing to those people. That isn't kind of like, hippie kind of wellness, kind of that kind of side of things. Or kind of, it's actually kind of much more suitable for their culture, right? So those things are really important as well. I'm sure there must be things kind of here as well which are similar. But I found that in the UK right now, there's such an open conversation about mental health right now. It is great. It really, really is good.
I think that we're much farther behind.
Really?
Yeah. I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at least the conversation's getting started. I think it's fantastic that you have a men's meetup group because, as we know, the statistics on men taking their lives is much higher than women. And I think a part of that is because, men were taught for so long to, suck it up and, just get over it and don't talk about their feelings.
Yeah.
And I can see where that's changing with my children's generation. I know a lot more parents who are trying to foster that emotional conversation with their boys. and girls, but
I talk to my girls about it and how it is and how it can be affected. We have and also as I'm a chair of governors in the school, so I think you have a similar system here where you have people who kind of sit as a board at a school.
Yeah.
So I chair a school, and one of the big things we do is safeguarding and mental health for kids, and this is primary school, so that's kids from nursery up to the age of 11. And we spend a lot of time thinking about these things and putting safeguarding in for the kids and making sure they're aware of it and doing the destigmatization awareness piece as well in the classroom, part of the curriculum. So we're bringing that generation up knowing that it's okay to talk about this stuff and it's okay to talk to their friends about it as well. That's a crucial thing. So if someone's kind of acting strange, in a kid's head, strange could be anything, but making sure they're aware of people are different and people can look and be very different from them, and that is absolutely fine. You have to accept them, but you have to also recognize when they need help as well and be there for them when they need that. And making sure we're doing things like good signposting in the school as well and things like that, so the kids know that there's somewhere to go, and this kind of brings bullying down. It means the kids are much happier. In terms of the social groups, you get less kind of school can be a kind of a hard place to be sometimes.
Oh yeah.
So we have less of that kind of like in the school. We can measure that as well. We can measure that in behaviour. We can measure that in the different exclusions and various of the different behavioural issues and things like that we see. So trying to do it at every kind of level of society that you can is really important. And for me, that's trying to kind of bring those practices in at everything that I do, and kind of when I sit in boardrooms or whether I'm working with a startup, whether it's education or whether I do some talks at universities, always make sure you kind of get a little bit in there and you can kind of spot those things. Because if I just talk about mental health, it's just a normal thing. If I'm delivering a talk about, how to create a product, a digital product, I might talk about how hard it can be and how stressful that can be and how that's fine and how you can expect that and how you can deal with that. And it's all part of it.
Yeah.
Right? You can't. I can't split it from. Cause the phrase you hear all the time, you probably hear it a million times, which is you have physical health and you have mental health. Everybody has mental health. People only think about it in terms of, I've got a mental health problem. It's like, no. Everybody has it. You know, Sunday night when you're not feeling that great, you don't want to go to work. That's part of your mental health.
Well, and up until now, I don't, so many people watch TV and movies, and up until now, it's just been portrayed as crazy. And now we're seeing a change, like Ted Lasso, and we're starting to see just a different understanding of it. And that's really, I think that's great, because just to see people in an institution and then people, of course they don't want to say they're feeling anything. This is what like society has showed us, that you're crazy. Yeah. And you're absolutely not. In fact, in a lot of ways, you're normal. Yeah. I mean, the number of people who sit on the autistic spectrum, who have borderline personality disorders and things like that, there's an incredible range of people. But they can be massively effective, normal, fine people. They're not, this idea of being crazy, which has been equated to being violent or weird in some way, which can be dangerous, is completely wrong. And that, again, that's part of the stigma, and that's part of what's driven through the media, has been driven through that. But I think with the media seems to be increasingly kind of becoming a little bit more kind of aware of those things and how offensive those tropes are and how to deal with them. The media that I consume tends to be much more conscious of those things as well. And things where people have physical disabilities as well. And how that can go across. So if you've got cognitive issues that affect your motor control and things like that, they're quite visibly different people, right? But they're just normal kind of people. They just see things a different way. Yeah. My brother-in-law is autistic, and he's got a first-class degree from university. He's a great animator. He's definitely a socially awkward person, but he's charming, he's smart, and all of those things, but he just
perceives the world in a different way
Mm-hmm.
and has to deal with the world in a different way from, say you or I or whoever.
Yeah.
We just have to be accepting of that. People are different.
Right. And people are different. And even in school, where not everybody learns the same way, that can bring up anxieties for kids who don't sit there and learn in a more traditional way.
Yeah.
And they may need more hands-on or more visual in some other way. And, that's another thing where it just seems like, I don't know about over there, but here in America, the public school system here is still very much, you read a book, take a test. Yeah.
We have a lot so in schools in the UK, it depends on where you go. So provision can be very, very different.
And here too, but majority. Sorry, I just wanted to.
I'm sure. One of the things we do is we look out very, very early for kind of signs that may indicate something. So dyslexia or dyspraxia or something like that, where kids need to have the accommodation and learn certain skills to be able to learn in a different way. So we have a lot of classroom assistants. So typically in a UK school, you would have a teacher and classroom assistants who specialise with the student about how they can learn specifically. And that could be anything from motor control and how to hold a pen, and that could hugely affect how someone learns how to write. But equally it's spotting things such as if their eyesight isn't that good, right? And because a kid might be falling behind in school, people think that they're stupid and all this kind of stuff, but in fact they just can't see the board. There's all this kind of thing. So I think putting systems in place for teaching and for awareness in schools is incredibly important to also pick up on those things as well. So if we think about what's happened during COVID, there's a lot of kids who've been traumatized by that, and a lot of kids, and statistics on abuse at home that's happened over COVID has been huge, and the mental effects on people, on the kids and the families are enormous. Schools are in a fantastic position to be able to pick up and deal and help with those problems. And certainly this is something that we did in our school, is to make sure that we were there for those kind of vulnerable people, and we were able to kind of support them, by making those phone calls or providing them with a tablet computer because they didn't have them, or whatever it was, to stop the issues developing. And this is the key thing about mental health, is prevention.
Yes.
So too many people are allowed to get to a stage where something happens, triggering trauma, or they tip over an edge, or whatever it is. The key to society now to prevent the mental health epidemic, which we're in, from getting any worse, continuing, is to put systems in to prevent them. So normalization, destigmatization, better policies and practices, better ways of handling people who are different as well. So it's a much more kind of preventative kind of model of thinking about these things.
Yeah.